I'm sure there are others that are still joining us. So welcome to the June Education Policy and Directions meeting. Before we begin, the Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Songhees and Esquimalt nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. As an uninvited settler on these territories, I just want to express my spirit of gratitude, especially as we go through these challenging times as a community. I hope we're all able to take some time to reflect and really connect to each other and to, the long thread that connects us back through history and through all that we've been through on these territories, and to the people who have maintained these beautiful lands since time immemorial. I know as an uninvited settler, I feel I owe a tremendous debt. And so I invite all of you to think through your connections to the land and your positionality here. I think hearts will remain broken for a long, long time as we reflect on the Tecumseh Secwepemc tragedy, which isn't news to any of us. 215 babies. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission unearthed a lot of this for us, but again, it's the truth of all those little bodies being found, and how that those treasured children, they all deserve to go home, every last one of them across this country. And I've been reflecting a lot on what my role can be, what our role can be in connecting those threads and supporting the work of reconciliation as a learning community. I think we have a really important role to play. And I also just want to express, as we heard the news out of Ontario, that a Muslim family was attacked and killed. My heart goes out to all of our Muslim families. We've got a real white supremacy issue in our society that we have to deal with. And I think it starts with the work we do in our school. So we all have a really important part to play here, each and every one of us. And so thank you all for being here. I'm not usually the chair of this committee, but we are without a chair at this moment. So I'm stepping in, but I will step out of the chair as soon as we have a chair to step in. This is our regular scheduled standing committee meetings. We have two standing committees currently. We have the Education Policy and Directions, which is the first Monday of the month. And then we have Operations Policy and Planning Committee, which is the second Monday of the month. And then usually on a regular month, our final meeting is the board meeting. So at our standing committee meetings, we have half of our board members are members, and these committees pass motions that make recommendations to the board. So nothing that's passed at a standing committee is final. It makes a recommendation to the board. And whereas our board meetings are very formal and operate under, Robert's Rules of Order that are limited by how many times everybody can speak and who and when can speak, our standing committees are very informal in the sense that we want all the voices at the table with us. So all of you who are here tonight, please feel free to participate. All you have to do is raise your hand and you'll be recognized by the chair. It's challenging chairing virtually. So if your hand is raised and you're not recognized, you can speak up so that we can make sure that everybody is able to participate in the conversation. This is really where we get to gather that information from community that helps us make really good decisions, so that when we go to the board table and we're in that more formal debate process, we have all of those voices and consideration from this table. So that's a little bit about our process. Chief Thomas, thank you so much for being here. Didn't see you sneak in, but welcome so much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being here. Are there any other honored guests. I'm not seeing Chief Sam, but certainly if he comes, we'll pause to make sure we recognize him.
Crystal Lee's here as our rep, I would imagine. So,
welcome, Crystal Lee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So our the trustees on this committee are, do you want to introduce yourselves rather than me do a roll call? So much easier when we're in a circle together. This is very challenging on the old.
I was going to say, Ms. Waters, the little icon above you, the little blue icon in your picture, you can actually put who's a trustee and who's a board member on you, as well as your name.
That is very true. And maybe that would be helpful. In the case of the standing committees, we have some trustees who are not members of the committee. So for this committee, Trustee Duncan, do you want to wave? Trustee McNally are our voting members, Trustee Ferris and Trustee Ryan Painter. And I'm what we call ex officio. As board chair, I get to be on both committees as a voting member, which is a huge privilege. So as we move forward in the discussion, I just want to remind everybody that we want to have conversations as if children are watching, and they are. Our students have been very engaged, and I know we all want to comport ourselves in ways that we feel proud of. And so just want to make it very clear that we're excited to hear all sorts of voices and questioning voices and concerned voices and angry voices at this table, but that it's really important that we're all respectful and that we focus on issues and not individuals. And that creates a safer place for all of us. So I just really invite you all to consider how we present the information, and I take that to heart as well. Passions run high, and that is exciting, and we're excited to have that at the table, but certainly we need to make sure that they're pointed in the right direction, which is at the issues that we need to address and not individual people. So with all of that said, I will preside over the meeting for the approval of the agenda, and then we have a recommended motion that's at A3 to elect the chair, which would be our normal process. That Trustee Whitaker has brought forward a consideration for us of a different way to move forward with chairing this committee. And so I think with the approval of the committee, if we could put that maybe in at A3 to decide if we want to use her approach. So would somebody move to amend the motion or amend the agenda like that? Anne, did you want to do that?
I was going to ask, I was going to interrupt to amend the agenda, but I'm not sure, can I amend the agenda if I'm not on the committee?
Yes, you can. You can move motions, but you cannot vote on them, but I think.
Okay, so thank you. And just before we move forward, I just also want to, with respect and humility, acknowledge and honor the lands of the Nanamu people on whose lands I'm actually joining you from this evening. And I also really want to express my gratitude to the Nanamu people for their teachings, for their stewardships of the lands on which I learned and I grew up as a child. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to spend the day here today. So I just wanted to say that before I move forward. And yes, I would like to amend the agenda to move the motion in regards to elections to whatever number that is. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone.
And thank you so much for joining us, because I know you are out of town. I'm suggesting that we move it to A3, so your motion will be the first one that we consider tonight after approval of the agenda.
Thank you.
So are there any other amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amended agenda? And that's unanimous. So Trustee Whitaker, do you mind reading out the wording of your motion? And
Yeah, I can do that. So thank you very much. So the wording of the motion is that the Education Policy Committee forego the election of the chair until November 2021 and share the responsibility equally among committee members until November 2021 elections. Is that good?
It is, although I think our
to-
elections actually take place in December, but perhaps we
Okay,
could
so
just say regular
whatever
scheduled.
that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
regular scheduled. So the recommendation here is that we have a rotating chair.
Correct. Do you want me to speak to it now?
Sure.
Yeah, so I really want to acknowledge hearing from the community that our processes are not working and that they feel very hierarchical, colonial. And I really want to also acknowledge the need for us to try different ways and to, perhaps share the leadership, because we all own some leadership. And I really just thought that this was an opportunity to share that equally over this time. It provides learning for all of the trustees. There's just happens to be 4 committee members and 4 more meetings until that time. So it's just a thought for this committee to discuss.
Thank you, Anne. Is there any discussion on the motion? Trustee McNally?
Thank you so much. Let me get my audio up here a bit. Thank you, to Trustee Whitaker for the thought behind this in terms of doing things differently, but I won't support the motion. I have 3 reasons. One is that bylaw, here we go with the bylaws, which kind of get in the way, don't they, sometimes? Bylaw 9360.2, Article 2 says that at the first meeting of the committee, when it starts up again in December's, that the committee will elect a chair. So this motion is actually counter to that bylaw. My second reason is that recognizing the goodwill behind this motion, when good ideas come forward to promote reconciliation or to promote reconciliation generally, I would like to hear those good ideas from the 4 houses, any of the 4 houses, all of the 4 houses, instead of us settlers thinking up the next good way to, do the right thing for Indigenous people and people who want to attend this meeting and find the barriers prohibitive. My third reason is, segueing from that, I really, although it's really interesting to think that people who, might want to chair could have the opportunity. I don't know if we could work that in somehow at a future time, but right now my belief is that putting different bodies in the chair won't change the fact that the system is the problem. Our system is based on British parliamentary practice, and that is the barrier. It's what we currently have, so we have to work within it. So I do try to play by the rules, probably to an annoying degree, but it's what we've got. I think that really we need to have a deep look at how we all engage together and come at some of the discussion in an entirely different way. So thanks for the good thoughts, Trustee Whitaker, but I can't support the motion.
Are there any other speakers? And I just want to reiterate that community, you are welcome to share your perspective as well. Everybody at the table. Trustee Ferris, I see your hand.
Sure. I just wanted to remind people that Trustee Painter is stepping down, at least temporarily, and so he probably wouldn't be serving during that 4-month period. Thank you.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to Trustee Ferris. Took pretty much the words out of my mouth. And I do think it's challenging that we've come full circle into opening this discussion to talk about bylaws when this was very much what got us into this back in March, which was the very reason I stepped down from chairing the committee. I could not, although I do sincerely appreciate Trustee Whitaker's desire to bring a new lens through which we view committee leadership into the district. I think it's an interesting perspective. I couldn't support the motion because the motion as it stands would have me fill one of those committee chair positions when I have stepped down because I have some work to do, considerable work to do in my own decolonization of my own mindset and thinking. So I feel stepping up would be doing a disservice to that commitment. So I appreciate the thought behind this, but I couldn't support the motion on that basis.
Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Trustee Whitaker for the thought and the intention, and thank you to my colleagues for their thoughts and views on this one. I think what it says to me is that, you know, we should be creative when it comes to maybe having a look at the way that we run our standing committees and our board meetings. But I won't be supporting the motion for the reasons that have been articulated this evening. But I would hope that we remain open to doing some work on how we run our meetings in future. But I think that that's going to take some more considered and collaborative work amongst our board and also with our partners, and very importantly, with the four houses. So thanks.
Did any other voices want to speak in? Trustee Whitaker, did you want to close?
Yeah, I guess I'm hearing what everyone is saying, and I guess I just first want to say, by no means do I think that this is reconciliation. I think for me, this was, you know, maybe a reset on the way people have been set in their ways of doing things, and shake it up so that people are open to creativity. We can become, I think, as one of the trustees said, very rigid. And I think that that's the case. So my hope was to just sort of shake things up a bit and everyone take ownership for the work. But I do hear what everybody is saying, and perhaps maybe the next phase has to be to look at that bylaw again, to find something that, as you say, makes these committees far more open, far more welcoming, and not about, you know, so the rules or the person sitting at the front leading the conversation. I guess I'm hopeful that we'll have conversations that are led more freely and not by a set of rules, but just openly. So thank you very much for considering the motion. And I'm sorry, I'm going to watch, I'm not going to stay on the entire meeting tonight, but I will catch up and watch later. I'm just caring for my dad this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Whitaker. Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of rotating the Ed Policy Chair until the next scheduled election? All those opposed? And the motion fails with 4 opposed. So we are now on to the election process, which is that the board proceed with the election process of the Education Policy and Directions Committee Chair by trustees sending in nominations and ballots by text to the Secretary Treasurer and Deputy Superintendent, who will then tabulate them and report out. So we do have a system and scrutineers, and this part of our agenda tonight will be a little boring as we send our text messages in to first nominate and then elect a chair for this committee. So bear with me as we do that. So trustees, if you could please submit your nominations to the 2 phone numbers that you were given ahead of time. And I will call first time, a second time, and once we get those out, I'll close the nomination period. I'll call for nominations a third time. Trustee McNally?
Thank you, Chair. This is totally my problem. I only have one of the text numbers handy here, so I've texted to that individual and hope that she will share it with the other individual if that's required.
Yes, both the emails went out. They should be in your email. It's just a matter of having a scrutineer if you're comfortable sending it to one, and I think that's totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to close the nomination period and wait for the nominees to be sent to me, and then I will announce them, and then we will vote to elect a chair. And then I will vacate the chair very gratefully. Okay, we have 3 trustees have been nominated to serve as chair. The first trustee nominated to serve as Education Policy Standing Committee Chair is Trustee Nicole Duncan. Do you accept the nomination, Trustee Duncan?
I thank my nominator, but I do not accept the nomination.
Okay, thank you very much. Trustee Diane McNally, do you accept the nomination to serve as Education Policy and Directions Standing Committee Chair?
Thank you to my nominator, but I decline.
Okay, well, here's hoping our third nominee will accept. We're running out of options. Trustee Tom Ferris, do you accept the nomination to serve as Education Policy and Directions Committee Chair?
I guess I'd better do that.
I think you've been voluntold.
I think so. Yes. Thank you to everyone concerned. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, I declare Trustee Ferris to be chair of the committee by acclamation, I suppose. Yeah, I was going to say default, but that's not nearly as ceremonial as acclamation. Thank you, Trustee Ferris. I turn it over to your capable hands. You're gonna have to work out that mute button.
Oh, right. Yes, I'll have to work out everything, Trustee Duncan or Trustee Waters. I first want to acknowledge the incredible work of our chair, Trustee Waters, and I want to acknowledge the work of Ryan Painter as chair of Education Policy. I can only hope to do as well as she's done over the last while. I also wanted to acknowledge some of the comments that Trustee Waters made at the beginning, and she closed by saying, well, how do we begin to acknowledge the pain that's being felt across the country? And I know that there's not a lot we can do individually, but I guess what I would suggest would be that we begin by treating each other kindly. And if we do that, that's a first step towards reconciliation with everybody, really. Thank you. So having said that, could I have a motion to approve the minutes? Thank you.
Sorry, I actually have a couple of amendments if I could.
That's great. So we have amendments. Trustee Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. So on page 2 of the minutes, the record of the vote that we had on the motion moved by Trustee McNally to direct the chair to write to the Minister of Education requesting approval to incur a deficit budget for 21-22. The vote that's recorded in the minutes indicates 1 for and 4 against. It was actually 2 for Trustee McNally and Trustee Duncan, and then 3 against Trustee Painter, Ferris, and Waters.
So noted, and thank you. Is everybody in favor of that alteration? Hands, all those in favor? And further to that, Trustee Duncan, you had another.
Yeah, so if we go further down into the minutes, let me just get the exact page for the committee. It's hopefully a rather straightforward amendment at under C, new business, C1. The last sentence describing the presentation from Mr. Shortreed. Its last sentence reads, trustees provided thanks for the presentation. And I would like to add, and ask the presenter questions of clarification.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Could I hear have a show of hands for all who approved that amendment? Thank you, and that's approved unanimously. Do I have further amendments? Seeing none, could all those who approve? Thank you, and the minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, I'll go straight to the presentations to the committee. I would like to say to begin with that our presentations to the committee are normally 5 minutes. And if you are not really ready to retire from your presentation, I'll probably give you some notice. So the first person to present will be Marianne Watson. Is Marianne Watson here?
Yes. Hi.
Oh,
Hi,
that's great. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Marianne Watson, and this is my husband, Marvin. We're here to bear witness to the issues that were brought to light by the SD61 budget process. We appreciate this opportunity to express our concerns. Our family are Holocaust survivors. This quote by Marvin's mom from the last days of Auschwitz in Newsweek, January 1995, expresses our motivation for our children to participate in music, as well as sets the life after death feeling the budget process caused. Quote, by whim of the commandant, an orchestra of inmates was commissioned to serenade the prisoners as they marched off to the factories, mines, and construction sites. This was the unreal thing, this beautiful music, said Rachel Puty, who came to Auschwitz in 1944 from a labor camp in central Poland. We marched out, the music accompanied us. We marched back, the music welcomed us. This is why it seemed already like life after death. The budget process triggered our family's intergenerational trauma. It was disturbing with blatant white supremacist and anti-Indigenous racism. It was evident throughout the budget process, and it permeates the SD61 culture. A multitude of discriminatory incidents were embedded in the process, in survey questions, presentation slides, and in the words and actions of staff and trustees in multiple meetings. The lack of basic human decency was evident when the May 28th meeting was not paused for 215 little souls to be grieved. A basic human right was denied. It felt like a hate crime. The message that our children mattered less was familiar. Our kids too have faced hate, bias incidents while attending SD61. The discrimination policy is never followed. We were told to get over it or faced retaliation, victim blaming, dismissed, blocked, or blacklisted. No justice and no peace. Justice requires people be held accountable for acts of hate and bias. SD61 does not abide by its own bylaws, policies, and regulations. Trustees ignored policy 8251, the Trustee Code of Ethics, Section A, Primary Obligation 1, fail. Many other policies and regulation were breached. First Nations education, equity, consultation, communications, and discrimination, to name a few. The complete lack of respectful dialogue was also familiar to us. The communications policy requires commitment to the principle of open, two-way communications, a shared responsibility of the board chair and the superintendent. Yet a trustee admitted on camera, quote, "When I listen to our right holders and our stakeholders, our partners, our parents, even our students talking about wanting to communicate, they're not asking for another news release. They're not asking for another web page or another posting. What they're asking for is a dialogue." The discrimination policy states, in order to create a school and district culture which supports diversity, all members of the school community must be expected to model respectful conduct and to refuse to tolerate any form of discrimination. This includes trustees and senior admin. According to multiple rights holders and stakeholders' letters, as well as the public record, senior admin committed discriminatory acts that require investigation and disciplinary action. We insist that these 4 actions be taken: an investigation with true consequences for the hate bias incidents, crimes throughout the budget process that were in violation of the Charter of Rights, SD61 bylaws, policies, and procedures. Number 2, a third-party audit of hate bias incidents with recommendations. This data is already supposed to be recorded. Where is it? 3, a new hate bias incident policy and procedures that address when senior admin are implicated. Collect, analyze, and respond to race-based data. Number 4, address issues related to the superintendent's office's discriminatory performance during this budget process. We recommend the superintendent be placed on leave while an appropriate, proper investigation is conducted into the hate bias incidents in the budget process.
Point of order, Chair.
I'm just about done. And until consequences are determined. Until this happens, healing of damaged relationships with rights holders and stakeholders, as well as the restoration of SD61's reputation and public trust, can't even begin. We almost didn't come to tonight's meeting after Carrie Newman withdrew as a presenter, as the 4 houses had not been invited or informed in a timely manner or respectful manner to our understanding. I'm glad to see that we do have representation today. Although I got the feeling from the stuff I read online that the message might have been as simple as there is no about us without us. So on that note, I would like to tell you, we would like to request that our speaking notes, as well as Carrie Newman's public social media and letter, and the rushing the budget through June 6th recommendations also be included in the agenda and minutes for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. So next on our presentations to the committee, I welcome Dr. Robert Oppenheimer.
Thank you, Trustee Ferris. I appreciate the opportunity to address the Education Committee today and the help of Kelly Gorman and Vicki Hanlon in assisting me in this process. GVET's schools and mental health team recent concerns have focused on the proposed SD61 budget cuts, including in vital mental health services so needed by the many students impacted by the pandemic, as well as the cuts in Indigenous student programs. We were happy to hear that these particular cuts have been reversed. However, the remaining cuts in the reading recovery, gifted and talented, food security, and music programs continue to deeply trouble us. GVET are concerned at the impact on the most vulnerable students of the loss of reading recovery programming in 12 out of the 14 elementary schools that had previously had this program. We also question cutting food security funds when we know many families are struggling due to COVID-related income loss. There are also many vulnerable students who benefit from participating in the gifted and talented and music programs, where they find other students they can connect with in a smaller setting. During the recent budget process, the input of Chief Thomas and Chief Sam of the Esquimalt and Songi nations was, in my view, essentially ignored. The letter that was read out by Chief Thomas on May 28 may have been heard, but it was not, to my knowledge, actively responded to. Their follow-up letter, read on June 2nd, seemed to have met the same fate. Their requests as rights holders were left unanswered. I see this as an example of the systemic racism embodied in the district's administration and board's responses towards Indigenous students, their parents, and communities. On May 28th, it was my understanding that Chair Waters said that she believed that the Victoria schools had their roots in the residential school system. Sadly, I think that's very true, in that then and now, local Indigenous students are treated unequally and without respect for their culture and values. In speaking on Thursday about the needs of vulnerable Indigenous students, Christalie Kelly, the Songi's Nation Education Director, put it very well when she said, "One size does not fit all." GVAT would like to see the situation of Indigenous education in the district change in meaningful ways. Indigenous parents must be allowed to speak freely without artificial and essentially colonialist restrictions, as Carrie Newman stated so clearly in his open letter to the district. Currently, there are very few Indigenous adults working in SD61 school buildings, which also inevitably, and this is well researched and I'm happy to provide documentation, impacts student outcomes when they don't encounter faces they recognize from their own communities. Many of the grandparents of SD61 Indigenous students were themselves residential school survivors. Some children came home unable to even communicate with their own family, having left home when they were very young and lost their language while away at the residential schools. This outcome was planned and intentional, as they were frequently beaten for speaking in their own language instead of the English they were being taught. Their long sacred hair was cut off when they arrived, and they were forbidden to spend time with their siblings in the same school building or practice their own culture and sing their own songs. Many of them were also severely abused, and some of their schoolmates and siblings never returned from the residential schools. The long-term impact of these experiences has led in turn to intergenerational trauma still impacting current SD61 students. To be blunt, these sound to me like stories more likely to have come from some other country, one known for having a history of such severe human rights violations against children and adults. Yet these things occurred over many decades, right here in BC, to members of our Indigenous neighbors' families. We believe that SD61 has some important choices to make if reconciliation is truly to be taken seriously. We ask the district to support whatever programs the local Indigenous nations and communities request in order to foster school success and a sense of belonging amongst their students. As one example of what can be done differently in the future, GVAT supports Dr. Lorna Williams' initiative to ensure that all BC public school districts offer Indigenous language instruction at all levels. In addition, we support the teaching of an accurate and complete history of the presence of Indigenous people in BC and Canada and the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge in all subject areas. Such initiatives would perhaps begin to right an historic and current wrong that has deprived Indigenous students access to their own culture for over 150 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oppenheim. Thank you for your remarks. Next on our agenda is Carrie Newman. Do I see Carrie? I don't see.
Gary wasn't going to attend this meeting. He asked that his name be taken off the agenda.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Chief Thomas. All right, we will move along to new business. And first on our new business is C1, Shelley Niemi. Shelley.
Thank you, Chair Ferris. I'm going to take a moment here just to take a deep breath. Okay. I'm going to take a deep breath because I'm actually wanting us to really hold space for the conversation we're going to have as it relates to Indigenous education within Greater Victoria School District.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a moment to get my slides up and be able to share them with you. And can we see these? Okay.
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint, Shelley.
Thank you. So tonight, I'm going to take a moment to share with you about Indigenous education across the Greater Victoria School District. I first also want to acknowledge the traditional territory for our Lekwungen speaking peoples, our Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, who are our rights holders. I want to acknowledge Chief Rob Thomas in the room tonight. I want to thank you for being here with us. And I also want to acknowledge Kaylee Dyer with Rob. And I also want to acknowledge Crystal Lee Kelly, who is in the room. But I also must acknowledge those that are watching on the live stream that aren't in the room with us too, right? That are holding space for this conversation to happen tonight that we're about to have. And so I'm going to start by self-location. I need to tell you a little bit about who I am first. So my role within School District 61, I was hired to oversee Indigenous education 2 years ago. And it's important that you know a little bit about who I am. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see one of the little girls there. That is my grandmother, Shirley Robinson, who comes from Atakakoop Cree Nation, which is part of Treaty 6. This year, I will outlive my grandmother. She died when she was 40. The little girl in the middle of this screen is my birth mother, and her name is Rhonda, and she was 13 years old when she had me. When you look at that's my auntie that's holding me as a baby. I was 11 months old when I was adopted by my great aunt, and I was relocated from my community. And I was raised by my paternal great aunt. And she turns 80 this year. And when you look at the right hand of the screen, that is my son, Landon. And Landon just completed high school last year. So not only do I speak to you today as a granddaughter and as a daughter and as a sister, but as a very, very valued community member that's going to talk to you about why Indigenous education is so important for our children and the generational pieces that we have for that. So some of the conversation that I'm going to talk to you tonight about is positioning ourselves within our story as Greater Victoria as I've come to know it. So when I look at this table of our ancestors, I look at this table was the Native Indian Education Council of 1981 with the Greater Victoria School District. 40 years ago, conversations were happening around a table on how to improve the outcomes for Indigenous children within the Greater Victoria School District. And that conversation remains true today. There has been a history of this relationship. And what does that look like, and how we're in relationship with our rights holders and with our community members for the children that we serve, that they send to our schools. Indigenous education just isn't culture language. It embodies lots of areas across our school district. And it's important that we know this. We have a responsibility to our students, to our families, to our communities that we serve, our local nations, which is Songhees and Esquimalt, for whose traditional territory we encompass as Greater Victoria School District. We have an urban Indigenous community population. We have a Métis community population. We have an Indigenous education department that has Indigenous education staff. We receive targeted funding that's specific to Indigenous students. We have conversations that we're trying to navigate as it relates to core funding and changing the results for Indigenous students in this education system. Local education agreements, and the relationship and the contractual relationship that we have with our rights holders. And what does that look like as we navigate through the education of the commitment we have to that relationship? We're a district team trying to work across the system. The BC curriculum revised its curriculum to include Indigenous education worldviews and perspectives across all grade levels and subject areas. And how we do that as an education system needs to be meaningful and relevant and include Indigenous voice. Early learning, how we're looking at the early learning framework and what does that look like to include Indigenous worldviews and perspectives from authentic voice. How are we involving our 4 houses in the conversation about what this looks like for their children? Violent threat risk assessment, the VITA team, complex team, mental health team. Our children, their names come up at these tables. How we're supporting wraparound supports from an Indigenous lens. What does this look like? And what is meaningful for them in a way that allows us to be able to lean into ways that represent our voice? Culture, language support, our elders, human resources. How do we increase the capacity of Indigenous people across the system? 1701 data, children and youth in care, post-secondary transitions, social emotional learning, land-based education, attendance, Indigenous student data, professional learning, advisory councils and committees, Indigenous student voice, English language learning, English as a second dialect, assessment that is relevant for Indigenous students, the calls to action on education, UNDRIP, the BC Tripartite Education Agreement, policy and governance structures that we have as a school district, communications, mentorship, our strategic plan, school goals, resources in school libraries, the resources that are in school libraries that students are using to access their knowledge. Are they reflective of Indigenous perspectives? Cultural safety. What does this mean? It means that the recipient of the service. Indigenous worldviews, Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous frameworks. Where I'm going to talk about tonight is our students. Over the last 5 years, these are the number of self-identified students in the Greater Victoria School District. You'll see at the 2019-2020, we had 1,530 self-identified students. This current year, we have 1,381. We know that we have lost a reduction in our student enrollment based on COVID. And so now as we come into the new school year, how do we reclaim our children back into schools that allow for Indigenous community and the 4 houses to be involved in ways that work to be able to bring our children back to school? When we look at the grade level enrollment from kindergarten to grade 12 over the last 5 years, we can see how our children are or are not transitioning from grade to grade, and what we need to be looking at as ways to better inform ourselves on how we can retain our children, and how we have to walk alongside our 4 houses to help us with that. When we look at elementary, middle, and secondary, we have families of schools. We have 7 families of schools in this district. Each and every one of our schools in Victoria has Indigenous children and families in it. How are we including Indigenous voice within our school communities and bringing Indigenous voice and perspectives into the conversations, not after the fact, but with? What does that look like? This is important for us to really hold a moment for. When we look at the 5-year completion rates, last year in 2019-2020, 49% of Indigenous students completed school within the Greater Victoria School District, compared to 83% of non-Indigenous students. There is an inequity gap that has and continues to exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students in this district. And in order for us to be able to redress what that looks like, We need our four houses to walk alongside and understand how we need to do things differently to better support our children. Our 6-year completion rates, there's still an equity gap as well, right? And so we have still anywhere from a 30 to 35%. And when we look at this, and I go back to our 5-year completion rates, how we interpret this is that only 4 out of 10 Indigenous students that enter into kindergarten in the Greater Victoria School District make it through our education system, in comparison to 8 out of 10 non-Indigenous children. We have a responsibility to do better. Indigenous education comes informed. There's many documents that guide education system as a public province. How we lean into these documents, I'm curious for us as how we start to move this forward. When we look at the progress report from the Auditor General, there was an audit that went out across BC on the Ministry of Education as its relation to Indigenous education. And the Ministry of Education has a responsibility to Indigenous students, their caregivers, and communities to provide high quality learning experiences and improve educational outcomes. The ministry is committed to aligning those efforts with the commitment to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the calls to action of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the draft principles that guide the province of British Columbia's relationship with Indigenous peoples. We also know that there's calls to action on education, and how we use our calls to action to inform our practices and decision-making with our 4 houses. How are we leaning into Article 14 and 15 from UNDRIP to be able to look at what it means to enact and fully embody how rights holders are involved in the decision-making of their children? We have a strategic plan across the Greater Victoria School District that informs us on some of our work that we're supposed to be doing. We have a goal that's specific to Indigenous education. Goal 2 says to create a culturally and responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success. This is the goal of the board. And in order to do that, how are we involving Indigenous voice to help us embody this and align with our strategies? Right, if strategy 1 really tells us that we need to critically examine personal and systemic biases, attitudes, beliefs, values, and practices to increase student and staff understanding and appreciation of Indigenous worldviews, histories, and perspectives, what are we doing on purpose to help us to align to that? Strategy 2, engage and collaborate with our local nations, Indigenous educators, Indigenous community leaders, elders, and families to enhance Indigenous student learning and well-being and identity. What does this mean for us? And how are we involving authentic Indigenous voice to ensure that this is actually meaningful? Number 3, address the inequity of outcomes for Indigenous learners in literacy, numeracy, attendance, and graduation rates. Through the strategic planning process, if community brought forward these ideas in regards to here's some ways for us as a school district to improve our practice, what are we doing on purpose to lean into this to create those outcomes and those conditions for change? For us, Indigenous education is going to require action. This is that in education system, we have to acknowledge the critical role of Indigenous communities have across our entire education system, and where Indigenous voices are still not represented as it relates to influence and decision-making, and what work needs to be done for School District 61 to redress this and align to what the documents shared with you tonight are telling us. So we can improve the current and future educational experiences of the Indigenous children, families, and communities that we serve across our entire school district. As a board and as an education system, we truly do need to embody these documents so that they inform us and our practice on the collective work that we have to do in changing the results and experiences for Indigenous students, families, and the communities we serve across our entire education system. The time is now, and that ethically we have a responsibility to the rights holders and the Indigenous communities we serve to ensure that they feel seen and that they feel heard. This will require us as an education system to pause, to reflect, and to have humility as we listen. Further, urgency, respect, integrity, and authentic relationships are required by us as an education system so that we can collectively focus on how to close the achievement gap that currently exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students within our school district. And that the achievement gap that currently exists between Indigenous students within SD61 and Indigenous students across the province. This cannot be accomplished without the voices of our 4 houses and the Indigenous Education Department. Tonight, as an education system and all the various roles we hold within it, we need to take a moment to pause. We need to reflect. We need to examine our biases, and we need to step forward into this work with an open heart and an open mind. We need to have the desire to listen, and we need to have that desire to listen to hear, not listen to listen. As we need to become collective in this work together, this cannot be singular. We must rest our egos, and we need to lean in with our hearts, as this truly requires that we are in relationship with each other. Lastly, when we know better, we have a responsibility to do better. Our past, our current, and our future generations depend on this, and they depend on us for this. This was our Indigenous children graduating our school district last year. We have a responsibility for them. We have a responsibility for our current generations coming into kindergarten, the ones leaving our system now. I ask that we hold that, we hold our integrity. We know that this needs to be collective work together, and that we pause and that we lean in with our hearts, because our children deserve this. I want to thank you again for the community that I have the pleasure to be a visitor on, and the children that we serve. But I ask that we do this work, and that it is absolutely critical that urgency comes with that, and that voice needs to be reflected. I want to thank you for your time tonight. I want to say hi.
Thank you so much, Shelley. That was very good. Do we have questions from our listeners? Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much, Shelley, for your wise words, and for setting us in the context of place, and for sharing with us a little bit about who you are and where you come from. I wondered whether or not you have a sense of making plans and setting us on a path, a direction, and in particular, creating that table. I was really struck by the photo of the table, and all those folks sitting around that circular table, coming together to make plans for action. And I'm wondering how you see us as a school district setting a table up that will allow us, in collaboration and with the leadership of the 4 houses, so that we can set some of this into a plan for some action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, Trustee Duncan. And I think, again, I'm going to echo that I don't speak for the 4 houses, right? What really needs to be acknowledged here is that, you don't do it with us, you do it, don't do it to us, do it with us, right? And so we actually have to ask and lean into our community as to what works for them, right? And what does that look like, right? We cannot make an assumption that this is what collaboration needs to look like. We cannot make a direction that this is what it must look like. We actually need to allow the opportunity for the conversation to happen, and we need to listen, and we need to let down our egos to do that, right? And when our egos are up, right, and we're not listening with our hearts, we're not actually being able to be able to land somewhere. And so my hope, my intention is that, that we have the humility to reach to our 4 houses and ask what it is that they believe is true consultation and what they believe that they need from us, right? And that we're not giving them what we need from them, right? And so I think that that's going to take time for us to have that humility as a school district and have that humility as, you know, all levels of this education system. Because again, it's the collective work for all the children that we serve. And so I'm going to hold true to that, right? Because I think, again, you know, we have some teachings and learnings that we need to do. And now it's more urgent than ever. So thank you. I think that, again, I'm going to hold the space for community to come, you know, with that, because it's again, not us to tell them. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelley. I'm going to go to VC PAC Chair Crystal Hammer.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I know VC PAC is also trying to work with how to bring more Indigenous parents' voices into VC PAC. It's a lot of work to be done. And I don't want this to come across as a sharp question. And it is a sharp question, but I'm just wondering, when we, you know, for this presentation tonight, did you consult with the 4 houses and asked if this is how, you know, what they thought about launching us into this conversation tonight? And the reason I feel like I have to ask that question is so much harm has been caused over this budgeting process. And, you know, I think about the slides and I think about the March 1 process, and I think about the letters from the Songhees and the Esquimalt Nation. And I don't see that dialogue happening. I haven't seen it happening. There's acknowledgement that the district isn't ready to, you know, didn't really recognize the systemic racism writ large on those slides and in this process, and heard you apologize a lot. And so I'm just wondering, has there been a lot of, you know, courses taken in the last month that makes the district leadership now ready to lead us, or the board ready to lead us in this conversation here? And I'm saying this with, it's hard to say this, and I'm saying it with the utmost respect, but I don't know if I feel safe in this moment, because I'm so concerned about doing more harm because we're a little blind to it. So I'm just wondering, well, that's a lot that I just asked. I just really want to make sure that even this conversation tonight is listening to what the 4 houses would like us to do. It's a good place to start.
Sure, I think there's a whole bunch that was asked in that question. I will do my very best to respond to it from my end and then ask and lean into the table. I think that as an Indigenous education department, I do believe that we have a relationship with Indigenous community in the 4 houses. And I think that that needs to improve across the entire education system. And I think that goes right from a school-based level right up to a trustee level. And again, that comes down to feeling seen and heard. And I won't speak on behalf of the 4 houses as to how they feel that and what that looks like for them, right? What I can speak on behalf of is Indigenous education staff that we have and the work that we're doing, and the students that we have a responsibility for that self-identify, and the work that we're doing to try to improve their outcomes, right? Has there been steps forward? I think that there's a lot of things that need to happen as we start to try to heal together and have a better relationship together. And I think, again, that's going to come down to us asking, you know, the community on what that looks like and feels like for them, right? And again, it doesn't require us pressuring on us needing an immediacy answer. Right. Again, this is the humility and the relationship piece, right, as we navigate through that. And I think, you know, even when we look at including Indigenous parents, into school community and student voice and school voice, right? We have to work with our school-based teams and our school PACs as relation to how does community see that, and leaning into our community and asking ways on how they believe that that might be able to increase that capacity. So we have to look at this relationship piece of what does that mean and how do we lean into in a way that feels authentic and meaningful, and that we're not making decisions and or asking or guessing, right? And I think that those are the processes that step forward. And so I never will stand here and say that I speak for Songhees or Esquimalt Nation or urban or Métis community. I will say that I stand here to support the work that needs to happen, and that structurally we need to land a lot of things in this district right now, right? Across all levels, right? But the thing is we have to do that by taking that humility approach to it. And so I appreciate the questions. I appreciate, the vulnerability in asking them, because I think when we start to put those out there, that's what's going to hopefully land us in a better spot down the road.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate your comments from VCPAC. Do we have any further questions? And seeing none, I'd like to move to C2, John Hamlin.
Hi, Trustee Ferris. Thank you very much. I'll just get my screen share ready to go here.
Good evening, John. You're quite quiet. I'm not sure if your mic can be any closer.
Sure, Andy. Is that better?
Yeah, sounds better. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see my slides okay, Andy?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Good evening. My name is John Hamlin. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Greater Victoria School District SOGI lead. I want to thank you for this opportunity to provide you all with a little window into the work that we've been engaged with this year. And to begin this presentation, because we're live streaming and there may be folks watching who aren't familiar with SOGI and some of its related terminology, it's important to clarify and reestablish what the SOGI 123 resource is and what role it plays in our district. SOGI stands for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. And contrary to popular belief, SOGI 123 is not an explicit curriculum. It encompasses learning resources for parents and educators, in addition to guidelines for physical environments and district policies and procedures. The goal of SOGI is to support all students, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and provide educators with the capacity to build inclusive school environments. SOGI 123 has been embraced by all 60 school districts, many private schools, and by almost every organization connected to education in the province. The SOGI 123 website is full of excellent resources, links, and supports for both educators, parents, and community collaborators. And this includes the fantastic new Educator Resource Guide, which was developed with input from school and district SOGI leads from across the province. Moving forward, to clarify both components of SOGI, sexual orientation is a term used to describe your pattern of emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction. And gender identity and is your psychological sense of yourself as a woman, a man, both, in between, or neither. And one's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth, and it's up to the individual to make that determination. People whose gender identities match the sex they were assigned at birth are cisgender. Many people whose gender identities are different than the sex they were assigned at birth may use the word transgender or trans, or another term they feel more aligned with. Sexual orientations and gender identities that aren't heterosexual or cisgender are often described by the acronym LGBTQ2S+, and this stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, and two-spirit. Two-spirit is an important term within some Indigenous cultures, meaning a person with both a feminine and a masculine spirit living in the same body. The plus sign is inclusive of any additional sexual orientations and gender identities beyond this list, and for some also stands for love and acceptance. But it's important to know that sexual orientation and gender identity are not the same thing, and it's a common misconception that gender identity and sexual orientation are connected. If someone is transgender, for example, many people automatically assume that they also must be gay, but transgender people may be straight, lesbian, gay, or bisexual. In simple terms, sexual orientation relates to who you have romantic feelings towards, and gender identity relates to how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. And it can mirror what a person was assigned at birth or be entirely different. SOGI is an inclusive term that applies to everyone. Since we all have a sexual orientation and gender identity, it includes all of us. And every student understands and expresses their gender differently, with interests and choices that are common or less common for their gender. And a SOGI inclusive school means that all of these experiences and identities are embraced and never a cause for discrimination. In 2016, as you are most likely aware, the board passed Policy and Regulation 4305, and these outline the expectations, behaviors, language, and actions required to support inclusion and prevent marginalization or discrimination within schools. And at the school level, this policy and regulation has resulted in gender-neutral washroom availability in all learning spaces, gender and sexuality alliances or GSAs and rainbow clubs, identifiable school SOGI leads for LGBTQ2S+ students, staff, and parents to reach out to, and at a district level, somebody like myself facilitating SOGI to maintain connections to the island and provincial networks. Research from Dr. Elizabeth Sawick at UBC indicates that the existence of a GSA or rainbow club in a school reduces stigma and increases a sense of safety for all students. Positive outcomes also include improved student mental health and a reduction in risk-taking behaviors. These outcomes are also cumulative and continue to improve and increase the longer these structures are in place. Now, throughout the year, we work to support initiatives put forward from our school SOGI leads. We host a monthly collaborative meeting, which serves as a safe space to raise questions, seek support, build and maintain relationships, and collaborate to support all students. And all of the following initiatives I'll be discussing have emerged from the hard work, passion, and dedication of our school SOGI and GSA leads. In response to a request from elementary schools looking to make connections between the students in their rainbow clubs and students in GSA groups at middle or secondary, Jen Walsh, the youth and family counselor and Vic High GSA sponsor, engaged some very talented students to launch GSA Storytime. These age-appropriate recorded stories are now archived and shared for elementary schools to use on Pink Shirt Day, during Rainbow Week, or whenever else they could be useful. In the future, once we move past pandemic protocols, we hope to establish in-person GSA Storytime sessions, connecting secondary GSA groups with elementary rainbow clubs in their catchment areas. Kelly Kraft, the GSA lead from Spectrum High School, surveyed her staff this year to determine their familiarity with SOGI-related themes. And from this data, she developed several resources to support students and staff with key areas like how to effectively communicate preferred names and pronouns. And these resources included simple things like the first day student survey, which inquired about preferred names, pronouns, and whether or not the student would like her to communicate the same names with their parents. In addition, she developed an LGBTQ2S+ student profile sheet to share with teachers so they better understand which names and pronouns to use in class, and to communicate this with TTOCs or other adults who may be guests in that particular class. In addition to that, another initiative from Kelly's work at Spectrum are the bite-sized SOGI resources. In response to her staff survey, she identified key areas of need and developed a series of small at-a-glance snapshots related to key SOGI topics, such as pronoun use. She shared all of those with us, and we've been sharing them out through our district team's social media channels. Because Victoria's Pride Parade normally falls outside of the regular school calendar, Rainbow Week has been occurring in SD61 for several years and continues to gain momentum. The purpose of the week is to celebrate gender diversity and inclusion in our schools, and to acknowledge that we're working to create safe and welcoming spaces for all students. Rainbow Week coincides with May 17th, the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. Rainbow Week 2021 also coincided with the inaugural Vancouver Island SOGI Summit, made possible by COVID and easy access to online streaming platforms. A brief summary of participation: we had 800 participants, or actually over 800 from across the island, with over 120 schools represented. And from SD61 in particular, we had 39 staff engaged, over 300 student participants, and over 30 schools represented. Some of the topics covered at the summit were SOGI inclusive education, how to navigate employment to find the right job for you, two-spirit identities, LGBTQ2S plus histories, gender affirming care, finding a name that feels like home, and there was a fantastic student project panel. One of those student projects I'd like to highlight was from an amazing grade 12 student from Powell River, Jordana Pangburn, and her goal was to communicate the LGBTQ2S plus student experience to staff in her school. And her project involved a pretty comprehensive survey on many different facets of the teen LGBTQ2S plus experience, including aspects of personal and social safety and health and wellness. And all of this was done in order to accurately assess the school climate on inclusivity and acceptance. Her project included examples and templates to support other districts and schools to engage their students in the same way. One of the most impressive parts of attending the summit was hearing from so many passionate and articulate students from across the island. I captured some of those student comments, and a few that really jumped out were, one student said, "I love the sense of community. I really felt accepted and like I belonged." Another said, "This was an overall beautiful and wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of the first ever Island Summit." And another said, "I feel like the expectation is still that you're straight until you say you're not. It would make life so much easier if we were just people until we stated our orientation. I wish coming out wasn't such a big deal." Other district initiatives this year, as a SOGI group, we collaborated to come up with several designs for a new sticker to celebrate inclusion. And in collaboration with our French immersion community, we ultimately landed on the following sticker design, which we have available in both French and inclusive French. And thanks to District French Immersion Coordinator Madeleine Chaly for her support with this initiative. And based on the positive feedback from the sticker, we included this as a design for our annual Pride shirts. And typically we provide these for district admin, school SOGI leads, and anyone involved in the Pride Parade, which usually accounts for around 150 people. But this year we had so many requests coming in from people looking to purchase these additionally, we were able to engage a community print shop to support in establishing an easy online ordering system that could be opened up to all staff to purchase at cost. And by doing this, we increased our capacity by 570 additional shirts. I really hope we can continue this initiative moving forward and in the future look to find ways to coincide these types of purchases with fundraising opportunities for LGBTQ2S plus organizations in the community. I have to make a special mention to thank Andy Canty, our Director of IT, for fielding the literally dozens and dozens of email questions that came in when he sent that link out to all the users. As the district SOGI lead and as a straight cisgendered ally, I'm acutely aware of my position within this conversation. And throughout my SOGI district role, I take care not to speak on behalf of anyone or any community, and instead just try to leverage this role as a source of facilitation, connection, and amplification, connecting our school SOGI leads together and connecting our schools to other districts and organizations from around the province. To showcase just a small sampling of some of the amazing SOGI work and school initiatives in the district, I'm pleased to present to you our 2021 Pride video.
You with the sad eyes. Don't be discouraged, though I realize it's hard to take courage in a world full of people. You can lose sight of it all, and the darkness there inside you makes you feel so small. But I see your true colors shining through. I see you.
I'm Jade, the custodian at George J. I'm going to be reading Neither.
Love you, so don't be afraid to let them show your true colors. True colors are beautiful like a rainbow. Show me a smile then. Don't be unhappy, can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy and you've taken all you can bear, you call me up because you know I'll be there. And I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let
going to be reading A Family is a Family is a Family today. Hey guys, I'm Micah. I use he, him pronouns. I'm in grade 9 at Fifth High High School. Today, we're reading Peanut Goes for the Gold, a book about a guinea pig who wants to be a non-binary rhythmic gymnast.
I'm going to be reading to you the story of Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the rainbow flag.
And we'll see your true colors. See your true colors. And that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show. True colors, beautiful like the rainbow.
Well, looking ahead to the new school year, some key SOGI related goals that we have include increasing awareness of Rainbow Week through the development of a school activity guide, increase the capacity of our district and school SOGI leads to provide professional learning support throughout the district in alignment with the mission, vision, and goals of the strategic plan, and to develop a more comprehensive and accessible district SOGI resource webpage. Lastly, if everything goes right, in 2022 to re-engage with the Victoria Pride Society to continue SD61 representation in the 2022 Pride Parade. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you this evening. An additional thank you to Deputy Superintendent Deb Whitten for the opportunity to take on the district SOGI lead position this year, and to Associate Superintendent Harold Caldwell for his support.
John, thank you so much. That was such an interesting presentation, and I really feel like I learned a lot. Do we have any questions for John? Yes, Trustee Waters.
Thank you so much, John, and to all the GSA leads and champions across the district. I know amazing things are happening in all corners of our school. One of my annual highlights has always been the Love is Love conference that our students put on, and obviously it's been interrupted due to COVID, but I wonder if there are plans in place for the students to take on organizing another conference next year. And because I know it was well attended from students all around, in our neighboring districts and even further afield than that. And it's so wonderful to be able to bring students together to be able to share their stories and passions.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Waters. Yeah, that I know that's been a great resource in the past, and I think the Island Summit sort of took the place of that conference this year, because it really was about connecting students together, not just from our district, but from districts right across Vancouver Island, from the furthest remote schools out on West Vancouver Island up north, right down through the Southern Island here. So I know there is a plans to do another Island Summit next year, and should those GSAs share that information in the fall that they'd like to organize another conference, we can do that one as well. Yeah, absolutely. We fully would support that.
Do we have any further questions? Yes, Trustee McNally.
Chair, if I may just add a comment, not a question. I want to thank all the people who are working on SOGI initiatives in the district, and particularly thank John for the great presentation. My most influential relative was my uncle, who lived through the Stonewall riots, lived his whole life in Manhattan, and told me many stories of the discrimination he faced as a gay man in those days. I wish he was still with me. Anyway, that's my personal heart feeling about what we're doing in the district. And thanks again, John, so much.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. This has been another reminder of what we've missed this year. Trustee Painter.
Thank you very much, Chair. John, thank you very much for the presentation, and I really enjoyed this. And it's one more step forward, I would hope. One thing I was wondering about, I remember I had a conversation with someone a while back, and my thought at the time was, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had GSA clubs in every school as a default, that it wasn't, it was one thing to say that it was available if a student wanted it, but that sort of required a student to work up the nerve to go to the principal and actually ask. And I was wondering, are we at a point where we just sort of have them by default, and at the point that students start showing up, then it comes to life? Or thank you.
Yeah, good question, Trustee Painter. And I don't have exact stats on which schools have them and don't at my fingertips, but I would have to guess that most secondary and middle schools do have a GSA, and a good number of our elementary schools have some form of a rainbow club as well. But I think goals for the fall would be to get more concrete numbers in terms of which do and which don't, and also to just re-communicate. In as part of the regulations 4305, all schools are required to have either the SOGI lead identified or a safe contact. And if there isn't a staff member that steps up or volunteers and wants to do that, it defaults to an administrator. So I think in the fall and moving forward, we really need to be more explicit about that, and potentially those types of clubs could be connected to that particular individual if they don't exist already in the school.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Trustee Painter. Seeing no further questions, I'd like to move on to C3, Police Liaison Officer Ad Hoc Committee, and I welcome Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we wanted to, as a committee, provide an update to the committee. And in providing that update, we also wanted to request through a motion some limited funding to help the committee to complete its engagement work. And so I wondered if there were no questions about the memo, if I might, through the chair, put the motion on the floor.
Do we have a seconder?
I don't believe we require a seconder at committee.
Thank you. Thank you. I wondered if we could ask staff perhaps to comment on the allocation of a budget. Perhaps Superintendent Green?
I would pass it over to Deputy Superintendent Deb Whitten, as she's part of that committee.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just in collaboration and working with the committee, is addressing and looking at how we support committee members on anti-racism education as well as trauma-informed practice as we move our work forward. So each of these, when we have people that we're working with in community to help us in our education, that does come with a cost. We try to limit the cost and make the most with the funds we have available. But in order to do this work, I think it is, we don't actually have a budget for the committee. So as Trustee Duncan has said, this would help assist the work of the committee to have a budget.
Thanks so much for your comments. And I wonder if anyone has any questions before we call the question. Trustee Painter.
Chair, you might have to clarify. I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Their hands up.
Trustee Ryan Painter.
Thank you, Chair. And it's certainly not the first, and it will not be the last time that happens. I just wanted to thank Trustee Duncan for bringing this motion. I do support it. We tasked this ad hoc committee with some very important work, and the work is being done. And I would be hard pressed to stop the work of this committee at this point, especially with the work that still needs to be done, which has been clearly highlighted by Trustee Duncan. So I do appreciate bringing this forward. And I do appreciate as well Trustee Duncan, Deputy Superintendent Whitten, and everybody who is on the committee for doing this continued important work. It is valued and valuable, so I do appreciate the need and look forward to supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. And seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. Oh, sorry, Trustee Rob Painter.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through the chair to Trustee Duncan, I was wondering if it might be possible to offer a bit of an explanation of how the funds would be used to support the work. I wasn't quite clear on that.
Yeah, so the committee was hoping for a little bit of flexibility in assigning a budget because we're not entirely sure exactly what costs we're going to incur. So there's a couple of dependencies. One, we are currently, and our deputy superintendent is helping us to identify someone local to assist the committee with some trauma-informed facilitation. And that is, again, to help to build the knowledge and skills around the table for those of us that may not have a background in trauma-informed practice, to assist us to sort of bring our level of knowledge up with some of our committee members who do. And that the intention there is to help us prior to making any recommendations to the board. And then the other aspect that we anticipate we may need some budget for would be around any kind of post-engagement work that we need to do, so post-public survey. We've acknowledged as a committee that even after we release our public survey and we hear from participants, we may need to adjust our engagement plans. If we haven't heard from our diverse learning community or from enough of our diverse learning community, we as a committee acknowledge that we may need to conduct a different approach to our engagement. And that may not involve, a survey. It might involve sort of more like facilitated sessions, for instance. And so essentially the idea is that we have a small budget to help us through these sort of final important stages of that engagement work.
Thank you. Seeing no, Trustee McNally, I think, yes, Trustee McNally.
That would be me. Thank you, Chair. When I heard about the expenditure on a facilitator to help the committee with learning more about trauma-informed practice, I'm wondering if there would be a way to kind of get more bang for the buck if the committee invited other interested trustees to be auditors, just sit and listen and learn. I'm just throwing that out there as a consideration for the committee. And yes, I do support the motion.
Yes, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, if I may speak to that. Yeah, thank you very much, Trustee McNally. I think that is an interesting and a good suggestion. I think that, in general, whenever we can, increase or spread the sort of the invitation to benefit from those kinds of sessions more widely, then we certainly should. And I guess I would just also say or add that I know that the deputy superintendent and I have discussed, trying to find someone local, trying to reduce the costs as much as we can. So we are doing our utmost to be as frugal as possible, but obviously it's important work and we want to do a good job.
Thank you both for your comments. I think we could call the question. All those in favor? And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much, Trustee Duncan. We're now going to Trustee Ryan Painter, who will talk about the new Accessible British Columbia Act.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a motion here that the Board of Education of School District Number 61 Greater Victoria send a letter to the Parliamentary Secretary for Accessibility, MLA Dan Coulter, and local MLAs requesting that people and children with dyslexia, learning and communication disability designations be included in the new Accessible British Columbia Act, which has not yet received its final reading. I have been engaged and interested in this bill, but it's been rather quick in terms of its presentation to the House and how quickly it's gone through. When I sent this in, it does appear to have started third reading on June 3rd. I do not believe it's completed third reading. In any event, I'm just going to give some background on my rationale for this motion and why I think it's important. So the Accessible British Columbia Act, known as Bill 6, is currently before the Legislative Assembly of BC for debate. And the Disability Alliance of BC and Dyslexia BC have some considerable concerns about the bill's narrow definition of impairment, which is the limited application of the bill, the failure to refer to human rights in BC Human Rights Code, and the failure to include interactive communication within the bill's list of standard and weak enforcement processes. For the purpose of this motion, I focus specifically on the areas of dyslexia, learning, and communication disabilities. From Dyslexia BC, they specifically have pointed out that Bill 6 has included learning and communication disabilities within its definition of impairment, which is contrary to the Accessible Canada Act. The Accessible Canada Act actually includes these two areas, and therefore it's felt that Accessible BC Act should be in alignment with federal legislation. There's a concern that the omission will systematically exclude and discriminate against British Columbians who have communication disabilities, as well as those who have learning disabilities such as dyslexia. So while Bill 6 is certainly a good start, by excluding dyslexia, learning, and communication disability designations from this act, there's a deficit in the bill in its inability to address significant and complex learning needs. Dyslexia BC has commented that there's as many as, I believe it's 80% of British Columbians, learning disability, which is predominantly dyslexia, 80% or more, it does fit into the definition of disability as defined under the Part 1 of interpretations, but the exclusion of dyslexia and learning and communication disabilities in and of itself does present significant problems, especially for children, in terms of how you could be able to apply designations to support students in our school district. So this has been something that I've been working on a bit as well with the Okanagan-Similkameen School Board and the Chilliwack School District. The hope is that we can pass this and get it sent off to the parliamentary secretary and local MLAs to prove an advocacy piece for this. The question could reasonably ask what happens if the bill passes before then, and it certainly could. I still think the advocacy is important. I know Dyslexia BC is meeting with ministers and MLAs this week, so I think it would be still pertinent to show this advocacy piece. And I leave it to the committee to determine if they support the motion. Thank you.
Sorry, Trustee McNally.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to Trustee Ryan Painter. Great idea, and I support the motion. Could you just tell me more about the 80% part? I kind of lost that thought there. I didn't follow you on the 80%.
Yeah, it's a stat from Dyslexia BC where they say of learning, let me just pull it up here. I've got it mixed in with my notes. So just bear with me. So they say learning disability, which is predominantly dyslexia, 80% or more. So the point is that within learning disability, dyslexia makes up 80% or more of that learning disability category.
Thank you so much for the clarification.
Thank you, Trustee McNally, for the question.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Trustee Ryan Painter, for bringing the motion forward, and I also support the motion. So thank you.
Great, yes, and my thanks as well, Trustee Painter. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And the motion passes unanimously. Moving along, I see no further notices of motion, so I could ask for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Painter, and a second. Trustee Duncan. Thank you all for putting up with a new chair.
Thank you so much, Chair. You did great. Thank you.
Thanks for stepping up, Tom.
Thanks so much.
Hats off to you. Thank you, Chief Thomas, for coming.